thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the healthy family podcast with your hosts Joe Witten and Fouad Kasab.
Hi everyone and welcome to A Quirky Journey. So today it's just myself who will be doing the podcast without Joe, but I've got an amazing guest for you, and I'll give you a bit of background about how this podcast came to be. I came up to Pacific Palms, which is 3.5 or so hours north of Sydney, and I had the intention to finish writing all the recipes for life-changing food, and I was staying at this beautiful Rammed Earth studio in Pacific Palms, and I got to meet the owner, Megan Cook, who's with me today to talk about permaculture in general, and also to tell us a bit about her really fascinating story of how she came to live in this part of the world and the amazing world that she does live in. So, hi Megan, how are you doing?
Hi, good, thanks.
Thanks for having me in your studio. I've loved it here.
Yeah, it's been great meeting you.
Yeah, nice. So, Megan, I don't want to get into your story myself too much. I would love you to tell, but I'll just have a bit of a background. So I'm staying in this Rammed Earth studio, as I mentioned, which is a thing that I actually haven't stayed at before. Like, it's a structure that I haven't stayed at before, but I was really attracted to it because it felt like a very organic place to be living in, and because I'm writing a whole foods book, it felt really appropriate for me to actually be here and in this kind of environment. And when I came, it was such a lovely place to be. Like, it felt really special. It's still like, my sleep has been amazing. The whole energy of the place feels fantastic. So can you give us a bit of a background about this place, what it is, what is Rammed Earth construction, and why you do it, and then we can move on to your story with permaculture.
Well, we moved out of Sydney about 10 years ago, and we really wanted to build our dream home and surrounded by permaculture gardens, so organic, producing our own food. And so my husband, was inspired by building these Rammed Earth walls and the light earth. We tested out some materials and, moved our way up the hill when we were building. It's been an amazing journey, and yeah.
So what is Rammed Earth?
Yeah, so Rammed Earth is it's an ancient sort of construction technique. It's been used for thousands of years, but basically to build a Rammed Earth wall, it's a mixture of mud and cement and a few other things. But basically you build a formwork, so on either side you pour the mix in, and then they use a compressor to ram the earth. So It's actually earth that's compressed.
Okay.
And it's quite a quick building material. Yeah.
And much more environmentally friendly than using the modern building techniques, I would imagine.
It is, yeah. So one of the attractions about having an earth home is that it holds a lot of energy in the walls, so a lot of heat and, in the winter, and coolness in the summer, so it moderates the temperature in the building.
Yeah, it requires less air conditioning.
That's right. Okay. So no air conditioning,
just
using ventilation throughout the house.
And so this has been your home for how long now?
Well, we started 10 years ago, so, in a little caravan, and now you could pretty much say we've been living in the house for about 5 years.
Awesome. And the garden that you have here is a garden that's built around permaculture principles, and you are on the board of Permaculture Australia.
Yes.
When I started talking to you about permaculture, I felt this was a topic that we haven't actually covered in the podcast, and it would be really interesting for our listeners because it does go hand in hand with the whole food movement. And it's very important that these types of movements really find the common ground that they have, and we should be supporting each other and talking to each other. And I thought that it would be a great opportunity to talk about the principles of permaculture and have your view about it, and how it's influenced your life. And so maybe you can give us a little bit of a background about how you got interested in permaculture and what it is in a broad sense, and then we'll delve into the principles that stand behind permaculture.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was actually working as a gardener in Sydney mowing lawns, and somebody handed me the Permaculture 1 book, which is written by Bill Mollison, who's the co-founder of permaculture. So Bill Mollison and David Holmgren developed this idea together in the 1970s. And when, as a horticulturalist, having that knowledge and a lot of, spraying with chemicals and that sort of thing that you're taught, then by handing me this book, this introduced me and opened me up to a whole new world of, that there is another way to grow food without using chemicals and in a more of a holistic sort of sense.
Great. So what is it exactly, permaculture?
Well, permaculture, the word actually stands for permanent agriculture. So as opposed to growing things in a monoculture system where you might just have one species, let's just take, for example, a football field full of broccoli, and that's how most of our common food is grown that we buy from the supermarket. So rather than doing that sort of thing on such a large scale in a permanent agricultural system, we pretty much use a diversity of species. We use animals. It could be worm farms, but different ways to sort of add nutrients into the system and to produce a high quality of food that's full of nutrients and to nourish, the people, and also looking at the earth, caring for the earth through that process. So really the three core ethics of permaculture are earth care, people care, and fair share. So looking at those in the broader sense, and all of those, how all of those interact with each other.
All right. So to sort of focus on that point of difference between monoculture and permaculture, what's the drawback of growing a whole football field of broccoli? What's the problem with that? It seems like it would be less work, that the crop would be more predictable. What's the problem in actually having it?
Yeah, so the problem with growing just one single variety of a crop is that that's not a system anywhere replicated in nature. And by growing a single monoculture, then basically the insects and pests and diseases are all concentrated onto that crop, and then it requires a lot of human intervention, through machinery, through equipment, through spraying chemicals to control things like white cabbage butterflies, to kill off the caterpillars that they lay. So there's a lot of high labour involved in a system like that, and a lot of high energy. So one of the things that we look at in permaculture is to basically store and catch the energy, and to sort of use low inputs for a higher output of a yield, say in a crop or a food system.
So how would planting more than one culture of food, how would that help in any way?
Yeah. Okay, so planting a diversity of species, so different plants, mixing them up. Say, let's just take it on a home garden scale, for example. Rather than planting just a whole row of broccoli, in permaculture we use like companion planting techniques, so planting lots of different flowers and different plants together that actually confuse the pests and insects, so that the plants are actually working together in a system that's holistic, to try and not have the use or the need for spraying chemicals. We call it an integrated pest management system in that sort of sense. So when you get to the finer details, that's what we're trying to do, replicate the systems that we'd find in nature, like say for example in a forest. You look at a forest system where there's plants, there's canopy plants, there's ground covers, there's, little shrubs. So in permaculture, we actually create a food forest which replicates that forest system, but we're using food plants to produce food in that system.
And how large scale can this get? Like, can this feed the world?
Well, I believe that it can feed the world, definitely. I mean, some people think that GM crops are the answer to, food security throughout the world. But in permaculture, we believe that lots of small-scale farmers could have a diverse range of crops and animals, which, is actually at the same time as feeding the world, it's actually replenishing and rejuvenating the landscape, rather than a monocultural system which is actually degrading the landscape, and there's a large need in that sort of a monoculture system to keep, spending lots of money putting superphosphate and nutrients back into the soil. So
you don't need to do that with permaculture?
No. So in a permaculture system, what we do is we use the nutrients that are being produced from the system. Say, for example, at our house here, and we actually have chickens. So basically we eat the food scraps go to the chickens. The chickens, eat that. That gives us really good eggs, nice green, yellow yolks that you enjoyed
delicious
this morning. And then they work those scraps back into the soil as they do their droppings and add that manure in. We add a bit of straw on top, and then around about 6 months later, we're actually created our own soil to then put back onto the garden to grow our own vegetables. So on a home scale sort of level, that's what a permaculture system looks like.
So with monoculture, then what happens to the nutrients? How would they go back into the soil?
So in a system like that, basically you may pull out your crop of broccoli. They'll then send in the big, machinery to plough up the soil, which again, in a permaculture system, we don't want to ruin the structure of the soil. We want to keep that integrity in the soil. So, so then they come along, plough the soil, and then add a lot of fertilizers to that soil. They'll sometimes say if you're growing a football field full of strawberries, they have to fumigate the soil to kill off any fungus in the soil that will then, get onto that crop of strawberries. So
sounds really healthy.
Yeah, it's not, and then we end up eating that in our food. If you grow, if you buy food from the supermarket in a conventionally grown sense, then it ends up in our stomach, and it's really not good for our gut health and our system.
So you briefly mentioned the 3 ethics. Is that what you call them of permaculture?
Yeah, that's right. So as I was saying, the 3 main ethics are care of earth, care of people, and fair share. So looking after the earth in ways we're looking after natural forest systems rather than, degrading the land by removing those forests. The forests play a part in caring for the soils and holding the moisture in the earth. So, part of that is to rebuild our natural capital rather than taking out rainforests, which is sadly happening all around the world. So looking at, storing, energy and nutrients in a forest and looking at that, as an economic system as well. But where we get medicine out of forests and things like that. So care of people is about nurturing yourself, communities. By nurturing the land, we can then feed ourselves, good food and eat, nourish ourselves. And then it's the fair share ethic, or redistributing the surplus, is all about setting limits to consumption and reproduction. So
what does that mean?
So setting limits to our consumption. I guess in this day and age, we all like to consume, lots of products every day. Mm-hmm. We're all consumers. Yeah. So I guess setting limits to the amount of stuff that we need or want, is... So
that's a self-imposed limit that you...
That is.
Right, okay,
yeah. So we all need stuff, but how much stuff do we need to live our daily lives? Yeah. So
this limit is when it comes to food resources or resources in general? What's the...
Resources in general, right, okay. Yeah. So, I guess... when you've got something that's old, try and repair it before you throw it into landfill, things like that.
Yeah. So a sustainable view of living rather than one that's just about consumption.
Yeah.
And that goes back to that question I asked you about like feeding the world, because we know a massive amount of food gets wasted.
That's
There's
right.
a lot of food that we do produce on these large agricultural systems that just we don't even eat, and we also then we say, how will we feed the world if we use permaculture or something like that? And you go, well, let's start by reducing food waste to start off with.
Yes.
So this is an interesting.
That's it. So one of the permaculture principles, and there's 12 of them, but one of them is actually produce no waste.
Right.
So, when we look at that in a sense of exactly what you just mentioned, it's we're producing all this food every day. People bring that food home into their fridges, and then at the end of the week, some of that food that's produced just gets thrown out.
Yes.
So, if we can buy less, buy smarter, and not waste that food, or, better off even growing your own veggies out the back if you can do that. But if you don't have that time in your lifestyle, you can go and support your local farmers, your farmers markets and things like that, so that people are actually eating local food that's grown in an organic sort of system.
I have to say, when I came here, there's a little bucket for the compost and the chooks, and throughout my stay, I've been doing some cooking, and I've really realized how much of the rubbish that I usually throw out can go into a compost bin, because hardly anything, if you check my rubbish bin, there's hardly anything in there.
Absolutely.
And most of it has go back into the soil and feed the chooks and things like that.
Yeah.
And it was really surprising for me to actually realize how much, to actually see it in person. It makes me feel like I should have some chooks in the backyard as well. But, so this has just been a revelation for me, just to actually, just from that, just even looking at how much things we will throw out that could go back as input into the soil around us.
That's right. Yeah. So by producing no waste, the other thing in permaculture is that we see waste as a resource. Right. So, when I see people throwing out fruit and veggie scraps into the bin, it makes me go, because I just think
I've been guilty of that.
Yeah. And everyone is, and that's fine, and that's part of the journey. It's it's just about educating
I'm getting
people.
Composting as soon as I get home. It's just amazing, how much less rubbish you produce.
That's
it's amazing.
Yeah, and the other thing about that is actually by throwing your food scraps into the bin, when that goes into landfill, it actually creates methane gas, which then goes into the atmosphere. And, it's
greenhouse gas.
Exactly. It adds to that problem. Instead of, so in permaculture, we actually say that we don't look at the problems, we see the solutions. So there's solutions all around us, for example, producing, less waste.
Yes.
We can all be doing that. Even if you don't want to have a compost bin, there's Bokashi buckets, which is a little, bucket that you put on your bench top, and you have a probiotic sort of thing that helps to break down that matter, which you can then add onto your garden as a fertilizer. Or there could be a worm farm. If you've got a balcony garden and you live in the city, then you put your worm farm out on your balcony.
So there are many options. There's really one of the things, it's like a limiting belief that I had. It's I'm renting, and I'll start really looking into these things when I move into my own place or something like that.
Yeah.
And by the looks of it, it's simpler than I think. I'm sort of overcomplicating this idea. There are solutions out there for people who even live in high-rise apartment blocks and things like that.
Yeah.
So, is there resources around that people can look into?
There's a lot of resources. So I was renting in Noosa for a couple of years, and I had a very productive balcony garden. I grew all my own tomatoes, cucumbers, had my worm farm, would give away the surplus to my neighbours and friends. So, a system, you could probably just get some old black plastic pots that people are throwing out at rubbish, collection time, buy some good quality potting mix, and then, start your own veggie garden, probably for $50.
Right.
Buy a few seedlings, raise your own seeds. Depends on what level you're at and, what your budget is. But you could start with $50.
Fantastic. So, it's much simpler than
it is.
We think it is.
Yeah.
And it was quite rewarding, seeing that kind of the bucket building up. Yeah. And I'm looking in the bin, and there's nothing in the bin. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the 12 principles that, and we talked about producing no waste.
Yeah.
Can we go through the others just to sort of talk about each one individually and
sure.
touch on those.
Yeah, so the first one is observe and interact. So it says beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And these principles come out of a book. It's called Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability, which is a David Holmgren book. And yeah, so observe and interact is all about really, say if you buy, it doesn't really have to just necessarily have to do with a garden. It's just in life in general. So we can use these principles in our business, in our schools, in our communities, or in our gardens. But one of the things that we've done on our block of land is that when we first moved here, we observed the seasons and where the sun hit in the morning, in the afternoon, in winter, in summer. And then you interact with that information that you've gathered, and then you can act on that. That might be from pest control to observing water flows on the land.
So it gives you more localized awareness of your environment.
Yeah.
And then you can make better decisions about how to actually run things.
That's right, yeah. So the next one is catch and store energy. So making hay while the sun shines.
Yeah.
So you would have noticed on the roof of our house we've got about 12 solar panels.
Yeah.
It's a 2.9 kilowatt system. We set that up, about 6 years ago, and we now get $1,000 a year back from the electricity company, so we no longer pay bills.
Wow.
So over a period of time, we were, hoping that we'll pay back our solar, the money that we invested originally. But the price of solar back then and now has come down so much that the same system now would be a lot less money.
Yeah, so it's more affordable now.
It's more affordable, yeah.
Yeah, and in Australia, there's you have to have solar. There's so much sun.
Yeah,
people should be doing it.
That's it. So the next one is obtain a yield. You can't work on an empty stomach. Right. So there's pretty much no point in doing all this work if you're not obtaining a yield. So we want to have our systems producing a lot of food for the amount of energy and time that we're putting into that. So that could be obtaining a yield. It could be fermenting, bottling, all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Another one is catch and store energy. So we're looking at catching and storing energy.
And that the sun energy from in the plants.
It can be the sun energy. Yeah. It could be letting our plants go to seed and collecting the seeds.
Right.
We're storing energy in that seed.
Okay, so you've been doing that here. You store the seeds from season to you don't go to Monsanto and buy the seeds each year?
Definitely not. So what we do in a permaculture system is that we want to save our own seeds, or if we can't save enough seeds, if we have a large garden or a large system, we may just buy seeds from a local producer, but somebody who has open pollinated varieties of seed. It's very different to GM seeds.
100%.
Yeah.
Like you come into the property here and you'll sense the difference in the way this agriculture works. I mean, it's not, you don't even have fields here. It's like raised garden beds, communities of plants that seem to be working together. The bees are flying, pollinating everywhere. It just looks very, very different as a landscape to what we're used to thinking as agriculture.
Yes.
And but it seems so healthy as well. And it's just all green and flourishing, and all the plants are growing together. And so it's just wonderful to witness.
Yeah, that's right. So the next principle is apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So it says the sins of our fathers are visited on the children until the 7th generation.
Right.
When you think about that, what we do today, if we're cutting down all the rainforests, then our children won't live to see these beautiful places in nature. Yeah. The Great Barrier Reef is a good example of a current issue that's happening right now. If we let that become a field for large corporations to get what they need, the oil or whatever they're trying to mine out of there, it will never be a natural asset to the rest of our, future generations. Yeah,
this is the same attitude that goes into monocultures is what goes into the mining industry, and they don't have that attitude of sustainability. It's all about taking without putting things back and looking after, like being custodians of the land, rather than it's all about taking, and this is it's one of the scary things that we're facing now. It really is one of the world's biggest problems, the way that we deal with agriculture and mining. To me, they're one and the same issue, really, the way that we're dealing with it. And it's nice to see that this kind of way of living is becoming more and more mainstream and entering people's worldview. So you do permaculture lessons here. You teach people about this.
Yeah, so we run a variety of different classes. For the locals, a weekly class, but we also run monthly classes from people, travelling from Sydney and distances. So all of our workshops focus on teaching people about growing edible gardens and sustainable living.
How have you found the interest in the topic over the past few years? Is it going up?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, more and more people are questioning, their lifestyles, their health, and I think more and more people are turning back towards sort of the land and looking at, at least just growing a few herbs for themselves, if not more of their own food. A lot of people that are moving to this area in Pacific Palms are actually moving out of places like Sydney and Newcastle because of the price of real estate is climbing so high that people can't afford to live in those places anymore. So they're looking, they're moving up here, buying land, and then really needing to learn these sort of skills.
To look after it. And so with the classes, you teach them these principles that we're talking about? And
so...
Can you give me more of an idea of what happens? Because I'd really love for more people to learn about this, and I would love the listeners to support you if they're in the area, to come and do one of your your permaculture classes. You also do cooking classes and things like that here, but just give me a bit more in depth of what happens in the classes and what people would expect when they come here to actually...
Yeah, sure. So, in our one-day classes, it's an A to Z of growing veggies at home.
Okay.
We teach people about... We do a combination of hands-on learning and a little bit of theory, but it's a very hands-on subject, and that's how I like people to experience that. So what we teach them is all about how to create soil from scratch, creating healthy soil. So that could be through building a no-dig garden and making a compost heap. So that's the foundation of all good healthy gardens, is having healthy soil. Healthy soil equals healthy plants equals healthy people.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, it's so simple when you say it.
That's it.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So you're saying we shouldn't be growing things in, alien environments, in plastic pots and greenhouses being sprayed with pesticides.
That's right. Yeah. Our body can't digest, GM seeds. Yeah. Our body can't digest the chemicals that are pumped into normal food. So... we're getting sicker and sicker, I guess. So, let's move back towards growing healthy food that people grew in the early part of the century,
Yeah.
When you go to somewhere like Italy, my friend was saying the other day that she went there and she's going, oh, is this organic? And they're like, what's organic? What? And she's like, oh, do you spray chemicals on this food? And they're like, why would you spray chemicals on your food? It's a stupid thing that we're doing. Yes. Why would you spray chemicals?
Well, that's one of the craziest things. It's poison.
It is.
I mean, that's what we're spraying. We're spraying poison.
Yeah.
We just don't use that word for it.
Yeah.
But chemicals, we call it pesticide.
Yeah.
But it's a poison.
Yeah.
And, and it's on our food. It's on thing that we actually put in our mouth.
Yeah. So there's pesticides, insecticides and fungicide. Yeah. And the last part of the word side, I think it means death.
Yeah.
So when you think about it that way, it's not something
that equals suicide.
You don't want to eat it, Yeah. That's crazy.
Homicide.
Yeah, exactly.
With the classes, you'll be doing the no-dig gardening, the composting,
that's right.
soil health.
Yeah. So we after I teach about the soils, then we look at what plants to plant together in a system that works. So looking at companion planting, and ways that we can do integrated pest management. So plant things next to other plants. You might plant your beans next to your corn. One gives nitrogen to the soil, and then the corn grows up and the beans can be supported by the corn instead of putting up, trellises and lattice and things like that. So the other thing is we're running a 2-week course in November. It's a permaculture design course, which is what I did when I got interested in doing permaculture. I did my course about 10 years ago, and it's a 2-week course where you it's an intensive course, and you basically learn the fundamentals of designing a permaculture system. And you come out of it, and the way that you went into the course thinking about the world and things is completely changed by the end of the course.
Wow.
So, what I've learned in permaculture using the principles in my daily life is that it's all about really changing your mindset and working with the principles to, create sustainable lives, which, we can all implement in our day-to-day
Wonderful.
lives. Yeah.
So that's coming up in November?
Yeah, so from the 19th of November till the 1st of December this year.
All right.
Yeah.
And many places for people to stay around here? Is there?
Yeah, well, there's some awesome places. As you would have noticed, we're surrounded by beaches and lakes.
It is amazing here. Wonderful.
Yeah.
And a beautiful studio where I'm staying at as well, which is attached to the main house, right next to the gardens themselves.
Yeah.
So I think if you're gonna come in, book in early so you can snag the studio as well.
Yeah, so students will be staying at the local caravan park where it's just over the road from the beach.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so let's keep going with the principles. I'm fascinated.
Yeah, we got up to use and value renewable resources and services. So let nature take its course. So by, using nature's natural resources and actually valuing them, what we were talking about before, valuing the products out of a rainforest and that sort of thing, where we're sort of, seeing the natural resources as nature's capital, So
what about letting nature take its course? What is the principle there?
Yeah, so letting nature take its course. I mean, often in today's day and age, we want things done yesterday.
Right.
So when we look at that principle, we're, using the other principles, observing and interacting, but, letting nature take its course. We've touched on produce no waste. The other one, the 7th principle, is design from patterns to details. So we say there we can't see the wood for the trees. Designing from patterns to details is really about seeing the bigger picture first. So the patterns in the landscape, we take the patterns out of nature. So you might think about a fern unrolling in a spiral sort of pattern. We use that pattern from nature, and then we actually design that into our landscapes. Okay. So in permaculture, we might build something called a herb spiral, which takes that pattern of the spiral out of nature, and we use it to create microclimates of growing herbs.
Wow.
So, we look at nature for our inspiration to design our landscape.
Yeah, it's very interesting because that's the golden mean, isn't it? It's like the golden ratio that sort of is the universal geometry. So those shapes are go all the way from like biological structures to the way that the galaxies are formed. You can actually extrapolate the exact same mathematical formula will describe all these different designs, and that's what makes people look for a unified theory. To sort of explain how the universe is working through like mathematics and physics to sort of come to a place where it can all be explained through this ratio, or there are these mathematical ratios that appear everywhere that are just, you can see it in biological structures. Let's say sunflowers, for instance. Mm-hmm. You look at them and you see how they're radial. And then you'll see also the same thing in the design of shells. So like a shell would sort of spiral in the same way. And it goes all the way up to the galaxies and how they're shaped as well. So, it makes sense to take these and sort of use them in organic design as well, because that's sort of how nature expresses itself in those ratios as well. So
that's right.
That's wonderful. Yeah. All right, cool.
So I love that. But also, looking at that, say, away from garden design, even it could be designing a business, designing your lifestyle. If you look at designing it from patterns, so bigger picture stuff down to the details,
Right, yeah.
It's been a hard sort of principle for me, being a Virgo. Actually, I really like the detailed stuff.
Right,
it's actually taught me to stand back and look at the bigger picture first, rather than looking at something, so small, the details.
Yeah.
So we say integrate rather than segregate. Many hands make light work. So, integrating systems rather than, so we integrate the system rather than seeing it as separate sort of things, as in the chickens, the composting, those sort of things. We actually like to integrate that to see it as a whole system. And we call it a whole systems thinking of design. So we're looking at the holistic system. So use small and slow solutions. Again, this is one of my favourites. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Slow and steady wins the race.
This is hand in hand with the whole foods movement as well.
It is.
Like we see the fast food, that's sort of when we're trying to take these things and make them really quick and convenient, there's so much damage that happens on the other side when it comes to the environment or our health. And it's the same way with planting and looking after the land itself.
That's right.
So it's one of those principles that seem to be fundamental to the human way of life, but all of us are always in a rush to achieve yield or results and things like that. So
that's right.
It makes sense to have this not only as a permaculture principle, but also as a life principle.
Yeah, through building, this house and these gardens and this business, I wanted it all done yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm not like everyone else in the world, It's like, hurrying my husband along to do these jobs. But then, this has taught me along the 10 years we've gone through and we've made lots of mistakes, and we like to say that to fail is the first attempt in learning.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
We've made lots of mistakes. We've, tried things as owner builders that didn't work, and then we've moved, on to the next phase, and we haven't made those same mistakes. So through that process where we can really teach people the right way to do things through the things that we've learned wrong. That
was it Edison who said he learned 5,000 ways of making a light bulb that doesn't work or something like that? Like how not to make a light bulb?
Exactly. Yeah. So use and value diversity. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. That can apply to so many things, but, valuing diversity in the garden, valuing species diversity, plants, animals, but also, in a business sense, in designing my business, there's the Airbnb, there's the workshops, there's, having a chef in to do harvest lunches. So it's a diversity of different things that are, events.
We've seen what the reliance on potatoes in Ireland did, when the potato blight came, and they had all their eggs in one basket.
That's right.
And that was really catastrophic. So that diversification, they use it even in financial systems now. People talk about diversifying their portfolios and things like that, because they realize that an over-reliance on the one thing, is going to be catastrophic if that thing fails.
That's right. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Use edges and value the marginal. So don't think that you were on the right track just because it's a well-beaten path.
Right.
So we've kind of, talked about that over the last couple of days, but, I guess being on the marginal and having different ideas to the mainstream is not an easy sort of task, but, it's one that, as we talked about, it's quite necessary to forge change and to make changes. And, at the moment, in a world scale with climate change and things like that, we really need to use different methods of thinking to actually combat the problems that we're facing in the world. But, permaculture gives us these solutions on a silver platter. They're already there, and we just need to use them. Wonderful. We need to teach the world how to use permaculture. So the last one is creatively use and respond to change. So vision is not seeing things as they are, but as they will be. So having a vision is just, we had this vision 10 years ago of, building our dream home, an earth home that was solar passive, that used, minimal water and we designed our waste systems so that we could reuse things. So, it's having that vision and then, creatively responding to the changes, which, change happens every day in our lives, and it's how we actually view that change and creatively respond to that change to actually, make solutions to move forward.
This is a beautiful philosophy for life. I love it.
Yeah.
I think also what we're seeing is people are starting to adopt this now. But one of the things that I'm trying in my own life is I only came to these realizations later in life. I lived like everyone else, and I wanted to get, the same things everyone wanted, like a nicer car and a better home and all these things. And it wasn't until later in life that these things started becoming more important for me, like actually living more in harmony with life itself and understanding myself better and being nicer to people and more sustainable in the way that I live. And we are finding more people waking up to this kind of way of living, but what I'd really love to see is these being taught to children as they grow up, because I think we want the change to happen fast, and we don't want this to be something that you have to live an alternative lifestyle to come across somehow. It's so fundamental for people's well-being and the Earth's well-being to actually be living according to these principles, that we should be bringing our children up to know that these are the valuable things, that these are the principles that life should be lived on. We don't have a school for life, and as far as I've seen, these types of ethics and philosophies are very, very important to be taught to growing individuals. So I'm hoping that more and more people will come across this and they will really understand the value behind these principles as well.
Yeah, and the most exciting development recently is that the government has actually, within the TAFE system, they've recognised that permaculture, is important to be taught through the TAFE system. So you can actually do anything from a Certificate 1 to a diploma.
Wonderful.
In permaculture. So there's many ways to enter at different levels. You can do it in year 11 and 12. I believe they're even bringing it into schools. But teaching it at preschool and primary school level is, something that's happening through even programs like the Stephanie Alexander Kitchen Garden Project, so it is actually really becoming mainstream information that everyone, is slowly catching on to, and
that's
it's
fantastic.
exciting.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. Yeah. Because we definitely need the world to change, because it's not really heading in the right direction. We all know this.
Yeah.
All right. Can you tell people how to find you?
Yeah. So if anyone wants some more information, you can go to our website. It's www.gardentotable.com.au. So that's just table.com.au.
Sweet. Come to the November workshops and let Megan know that we sent you there. And thanks, guys, for listening. Megan, thank you so much for taking the time and telling us about this wonderful way of life, and all the best for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Fouad. Awesome. It's been awesome to meet you.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.